Do you think that there should be a federal law criminalizing domestic terrorism? The president used that phrase, but that's not really on the books.
I'll let the president speak to the legal outlook with regard to the definition of terrorism, but whether it's called that legally or not, this was terrorism. This was hate. And this would be a good day for every politician in this country, left, right, and center, every media figure in this country, left, right, and center, to come out and unequivocally condemn white nationalism, so-called replacement theory, and any other hateful ideology that could have contributed to something like this before it happens again.
But should there be a federal statute that elevates things when those terms you just threw out there? Should there be an association directly with terrorism?
Again, we don't know, obviously, all of the details that fit the legal definitions. What we know is that somebody traveled a long distance with an AR-15 to hunt human beings, to hunt black people. And we need to make sure that we root out that kind of hate. And, by the way, that we have a conversation about the availability of the kind of tactical weaponry that he seems to have had. And yet we seem to be having that conversation over and over and over again as a country.
This is Pete Buttigieg responding to the tragic shooting in Buffalo, New York, in which a white supremacist mass shooter killed 10 people, 8 of whom were black, in the latest in what seems like an interminable pattern of senseless killings in this country, fueled by the rise of hate and extremism. Now, I know that Buttigieg is probably limited in terms of what he can say about new federal statutes because it's not his job to upstage the president whose administration he works in, but I don't work for an administration, so for what it's worth, we should absolutely, unequivocally, without a doubt, have a federal statute criminalizing domestic terrorism. It is a blight on this country, it's left Americans writ large feeling unsafe, and it's only getting worse. And that's not just my opinion. The nation's top law enforcement officials have said expressly that the greatest domestic threat facing the U.S. comes from racially motivated violent extremists, quote, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race. I'm old enough to remember spending $2 trillion and 20 years fighting a war in the Middle East because that's how seriously we took radical Islamic terror and the threats that came with it. $2 trillion and 20 years. I don't remember a time in my life where we weren't at war in the Middle East, and yet now, when the threat of white supremacist domestic terrorism is far, far higher than the threats that we faced in the aftermath of 9/11, we can't even figure out if we should pass a federal statute making it a crime? Give me a break. Here's why nothing's happening. Because the same exact people who are committing these crimes are allies to the party that controls half of our government. Period. Republicans rely on the support that they get from these people, and so they're not going to do anything to alienate those people, like by, for example, categorizing their activity as a federal crime. You'd have to have your head buried 5 feet in the sand if you don't see the links between these white militia groups like the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers and the Proud Boys and the Republican Party. In fact, the leader of the Oath Keepers and 10 others were charged with seditious conspiracy for their participation in the January 6th insurrection, an event incited by Donald Trump himself. The link between those people and that party could not be more obvious. But in case it wasn't obvious enough, consider too that Tucker Carlson's been mainstreaming and championing replacement theory or white replacement theory for years on air, which is the exact conspiracy theory cited by the Buffalo shooter in his manifesto.
Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. If this was happening in your house, if you were in 6th grade, for example, and without telling you, your parents adopted a bunch of new siblings and gave them brand new bikes and let them stay up later and help them with their homework and gave them twice the allowance that they gave you, you would say to your siblings, I think we're being replaced by kids that our parents love more. And it would be kind of hard to argue against you because look at the evidence. So this matters on a bunch of different levels, but on the most basic level, it's a voting rights question. In a democracy, one person equals one vote. If you change the population, you dilute the political power of the people who live there. So every time they import a new voter, I become disenfranchised as a current voter. So I don't understand why we don't understand this. I mean, everyone wants to make a racial issue out of it. Ooh, the white replacement theory. No. This is a voting rights question. I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that? Of course you're not working to import as many new citizens as we can into the United States to replace all the disobedient ones who didn't vote for us. In other words, you're being replaced and there's nothing you can do about it. So shut up! The great replacement theory, it's a lie, they yelled. George Soros has nothing to do with that. Stop talking. They said we were espousing something called the great replacement theory, a well-known racist fantasy. The great replacement. They acknowledge that it's real and they love it. This policy is called the great replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries. The great replacement plan is working.
And for those of you saying, well, that's just Tucker, he's not a politician, he's just some fringe media personality. Nope. Here's Matt Gaetz applauding Tucker for promoting replacement theory. He tweeted, "Tucker Carlson is correct about replacement theory as he explains what is happening to America." Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick told Fox's Laura Ingraham that the Biden administration's immigration policy is designed to eventually create a new group of Democratic voters and, quote, "every one of them will have 2 or 3 children." Republican lawmaker Scott Perry said during a committee hearing, quote, "For many Americans, what seems to be happening, or what they believe right now is happening, is what appears to them is we're replacing national-born American, native-born Americans to permanently transform the landscape of this very nation." Even Elise Stefanik, the number 3 Republican in the House, had purchased Facebook ads promoting replacement theory. And then she's got the audacity to come onto Twitter and tweet, "Very saddened to hear the tragic news of fellow New Yorkers in Buffalo. We are praying for the entire community and law enforcement at this time." Weird that she's, quote, "very saddened," when she paid for Facebook ads promoting the exact conspiracy theory the shooter espoused. It seems like those ads she paid for actually worked. Isn't that what she wanted? So when Pete says that every politician, left, right, and center should condemn it, the reason he said that isn't because the condemnation would actually do anything, because any sentient being knows that even when we do get any condemnations, they ring hollow. The reason is because he knows that they won't. He knows that they can't. He knows that these people are on the same side as the people that they're supposed to condemn. And that's the most pathetic part of our politics today. That we already know it's impossible for these Republicans to condemn far-right hate because doing so would undermine their own interests. So look, if that vile ideology is something that you espouse, then it's pretty clear which party you belong to, and there's nothing that I can say that'll sway you. But if it's not, then you have an obligation to speak out and pick a side, because silence here is complicity. And for the sake of Americans as they go to concerts and church and now even the grocery store, we can't afford any longer to pretend that this is normal or okay. To see more videos like this, click the subscribe button right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work, subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I cover the most important stories each week, and my guest is always one of the top political figures, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Cory Booker, and so many more. The podcast link is also right here on this screen, so give it a listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.